Okay, so my presentation is on 1 Year War. So overview and intro. The 1 Year War is the first major conflict in the Universal Century, which is a timeline in the Gundam franchise, which began airing on April 7th, 1979, and there's still new shows, movies, manga, novels, model kits, and all sorts of other merchandise in this series being made to this day. This image here is a map of Earth's orbit in the Gundam timeline. So we have Earth in the center, then we have the moon, and you have these things called sides, which are space colonies that people live in. And then you have stuff like Solomon, Maoku, and Munatu, which are asteroids that are orbiting Earth and are used for like mining and stuff like that. So Space Solomon. The Universal Century timeline is one in which the governments of Earth united into one unit known as the Earth Federation. And due to overpopulation, this government began to develop space colonies that orbited in the Lagrange points, which are areas in between the moon and Earth's orbits. During an opening ceremony for one of these colonies, the Universal Century was officially signed in by the Laplace Declaration, which is seen in this image. This is the entire charter with all of its words on it. So that is actually readable, but it's just too small on this slide. And during this declaration, there was a terrorist attack, and this declaration was lost. Eventually, it was captured by a company that used it to blackmail the Federation government into doing certain things for them. So rising tensions. Due to the nature of space colonies being used as a means of solving overpopulation, many of the early colonists, also known as space noids, were forced into orbit. Some of them went by choice, but a lot of them were forced there to move from Earth to the colonies, and they weren't treated very well by the Earth Federation forces that ran the colonies. This treatment led to civil unrest and frequent anti-Federation demonstrations. This one right here is a demonstration in, I believe, I want to say side 3 or side 2. So you can kind of see inside a colony there. Founding of a dynasty. One of the most prevalent anti-Federation movements was within Side 3, and Side 3 was known as Unzo when it first began. This movement was known as Zionism, and basically what it said is that by people moving into space, they would evolve and learn to communicate without any barriers, and was led by a man known as Zionism Daikun. During one of his speeches for his colony's independence from the Federation, he suffered from a heart attack and collapsed. And seeing this as an opportunity, the Zawi family, which were a family of people within Side 3, and were close political allies with Daikun, took power over the movement and founded the Principality of Zion. And in this image, you can see the entirety of the Zabi family. Degwin Zabi, Viren Zabi, Celia Zabi, Garma Zabi, and Dozel Zabi. Yes?
Can you give me like a quick synopsis of what you just explained? Because remember how we did like the legal jargon? I feel like that's how I feel right now.
Okay, so basically brief synopsis of what I just explained.
I feel like there's a lot of names and like a lot of terminology that I don't understand.
So the Earth Federation is a government that basically united all of Earth under its banner, and the Earth got overpopulated, so they built colonies in space and forced people to live in these colonies. These colonies weren't treated very well, and one of them formed a movement known as Zionism, which led to the creation of the Principality of Zion. That's basically everything that I just said. Okay. And these people are all very important. He is the sovereign of Zion and his children, which are these four back here, are all commanders within the military of Zion. New tools of war. So the Zabi family had great ambitions of what they wanted out of the Zion military, but since they were only one colony, and at the time all they had for military strength was a military academy, they needed a way to maximize the use of every single soldier, so that every soldier on the battlefield had just as important of a role as like a commander or a warship in today's military. To do this, they developed a new type of weapon known as a mobile suit. The very first one is shown right here, the AXA-3, also known as the MS-01 Crabman.
Say Crabman?
Yes. Which later on, mobile suits averaged around 18 meters tall, but most Zion mobile suits are 16 to 17 meters tall during the 1 year war. And they would later be evaluated to have equal combat strength to 5 battleships, depending on who was piloting it. An example of later developments of Zion mobile suits would be this right here, the Zaku 1 Sniper, which was a derivative of the Zaku 1, which was the mobile suit that replaced the Crabman in Zion's military by the time that the war actually started. First tragedy. So once mobile suit development was completed, the Principality of Zion declared its independence from the Federation government and began strengthening its military and starting attacks on Federation colonies. One of these was a colony within Side 2 during UC 0079. The attack on Side 2 killed every person inside of the colony with poison gas, and then they applied heat shielding to the colony and sealed it off, and then attached a booster to the back of the colony and basically used it as a ballistic weapon against the Earth.
Wait, they like put these like rockets on the whole colony and
Yeah.
shot them places?
Yeah, just the one.
That's crazy.
Turning it into a ballistic weapon that was intended to be dropped on the Earth Federation's headquarters in Jaguro, in a mission known as Operation British. This operation was veered off course, and instead the colony fell on Sydney, Australia. And I do have video of that here. Oh. And of course it does not work, because why would it? This. Why is it doing this? What's going on? Okay. Hold up, I need to fix this. Built-in display. There we go. Okay. So this is footage of the colony drop operation. So this colony has that booster attached to the back of it, and it's being sent out of its orbit and towards the Earth. And then the Earth Federation sends a fleet to try and break it up before it enters the atmosphere. By the 15th of January, it enters orbit and starts to break up. Yes, there were people in there, but before the colony was dropped, they were all killed by a poisonous gas.
On purpose? Or
Yes, on purpose. Because they were people who were against the Zion movement.
So they just backfired.
And this is it landing in Sydney, Australia.
Tsunami, I guess.
That's a Sunday evening issue.
That looks like something really hot when it was going.
And basically all of Australia becomes a crater.
So basically nothing changed.
And the drop of the colony also led to weather disasters and other disasters, and people fleeing areas damaged by the colony died from diseases and such. And debris rained down for a significant amount of time.
Killing that colony because that backfired. I was in that mid. The rest of his family dead, that's for sure.
And by the end of the time that deaths were counted, it was found that roughly half of Earth's population was wiped out by this attack.
Dang.
And it was only just the beginning of the war.
Did they have anything in particular that they like use as inspiration?
The colony is actually, the design of the colony is based off of an actual scientific document of a concept of how a space colony would look. And the series is loosely inspired by World War II. Yes?
So you said there was an overpopulation, so is that just them purposely trying to wipe out certain populations?
Well, no. Actually, they didn't intend for the colony to land where it landed. They intended for it to land on the military headquarters of the Earth Federation government because Zion has significantly less people and resources, so they wanted to crush their entire opposing force with a single attack, but because it missed, they instead created a tragedy that killed half of the world's population.
This also kind of like I watched Star Trek. It's kind of similar to that.
Oh, whoops. I guess kind of similar in the sense
I've
that
also watched Star Wars.
I guess kind of similar in the sense that there's a one world government and then there's colonies, but
That's what I was kind of thinking.
besides that, not
Because
really.
they just talk about like the Federation and like you know like if somebody is doing something bad and the Federation like goes after them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, line in the snow, the colony drop and the initial battles between the Earth Federation and Zion wiped out half of both of their populations, so Zion also suffered great losses within the first stages of the war. This massive loss of life led to the Antarctic Treaty, which banned the use of nuclear weapons in warfare, and it also banned the use of poison gas and colony drops. Fighting continued, but the two sides were at a stalemate, and during this time, Zion launched an invasion of the Earth, and the Federation began developing its own mobile suits. An example of an early Federation-built mobile suits would be this, which is the RX-79G ground Gundam. This one has a different head than it normally would because I based this one off of a specific suit from one of the shows where they get damaged in a battle and replace it with this headpiece. So.
Okay. Then obviously those are models.
Yes.
2 slides ago you talked about the weapons
Yeah.
being 16 meters.
Yes.
Would that weapon be 16 meters?
Well, like the entire suit itself, not the weapon it's holding.
Got it. That's still pretty big.
Yeah. They actually have, in Japan, they made a 1-to-1 scale moving one of those. And you can actually go see it, and it like walks and stuff. It's really cool.
Can people get it in?
What?
Is that can people get
I do not believe so.
I feel like there would be plenty of people who make it.
Yeah, there would be. So, losing ground, the war was going fairly well for Zion, and they had taken a vast amount of Earth's territory, including most of North America. In fact, basically the entirety of the United States, as well as some of Mexico and some of Canada, was controlled by Zion, as well as some areas within Ukraine and the Middle East, which were taken for mining bases. Federation mobile suit. Well, however, with the completion of the Earth Federation's mobile suits and the incompetence of certain Zion leaders, the war quickly began turning in the Federation's favor, and by December 24th, UC 0079, 2 of the high-ranking Zabi family members, Garma Zabi and Dozo Zabi, were killed in action. Garma Zabi, which was this man right here, he died. He was the commander of the Earth invasion fleet, and he died in action. Basically, one of his soldiers had deliberately given him wrong information, which led what he thought was going to be a quick attack into essentially a suicide attack that he had no way of surviving. And Dozo Zabi was the vice admiral of Zeon's military. He was essentially the second highest ranking military official, and he died in action as well. The end of the war. The one-year war ended with Operation Star 1, which was the name of the Earth Federation's forces' plan of assault on the space fortress Baoku, which you can see in this slide right here. This is Baoku, and it was essentially the second to last defense line for Side 3, which was the home of Zeon. Oh wait, no, that's wrong. It was the last defense line for Side 3, which was the home of Zeon. Yes, Alicia.
Can you explain the UC thing? Is that like the BC?
UC is the time abbreviation. It's essentially like BC or BCE or that, and it stands for Universal Century.
I was just gonna say, in the paragraph, it says the universal central, I wonder.
So, needless to say, losing their last line of defense was incredibly bad for Zeon. And before this battle began, the actual supreme leader of Zeon, Degwin Zabi, had planned a meeting for a peace treaty with the Federation. However, both of the ships were shot down by an unknown attack. Degwin's oldest son, Giran Zabi, gained control of the Zeon military, and it was later found out that he was actually the one who ordered the attack that killed his father. And when his sister found out, she killed him. And needless to say, with almost all of their leadership dead, the soldiers of Zeon didn't want to fight anymore, because the vast majority of them were either loyal to Giran or to Degwin, and with both of them dead, they had no loyalties left. So,
It's like a real messed up band.
yeah.
Can you talk about that? Who killed who?
Okay, so Giran Zabi, the oldest son of Degwin Zabi, killed his father, and then his sister, Casilia Zabi, found out and killed him.
Oh, okay.
And then she
Right,
was
like
killed.
they were so mad that.
Yes. And then she was killed by a man known as Shar Osnable, who is actually the son of Zeon Zoom Daikun, who was the starter of the whole movement and who was thought to have been poisoned by the Zabi family. So he essentially planned to destroy the entire Zabi family from within for revenge of his father's death. And he's a very interesting man. He goes by a lot of aliases. Like, I think there's like 5 different names he goes by throughout the series. And basically, with the loss of Zeon at this battle, they surrendered to the Federation. They had no one left. Well, they didn't have very many people left willing to fight, and those left willing to fight actually went into hiding and would become important later on within the Universal Century. So that concludes the information of just the one-year war, so I'll take any questions. Yes?
So these people are all in space, right?
Yes.
So how did they go into hiding?
They entered... Where is it? Is it on this? Huh. It's weird that it's not on this. Okay. It's not on this map, but there's an asteroid that is also floating in the Earth's orbit known as Axis, and that's where they all hid. Jesse.
Can you show me the weather?
The what? Oh, yeah, right. So this is another example of Zeon mobile suit development. This is known as the DOM. Essentially, the reason why its legs and waist is so big is because, yeah, that is not. The reason why they're so big is there are these thrusters underneath, and it is meant to participate in battles on Earth, and it uses those thrusters to essentially hover, which allows it to move faster on the battlefield than a standard machine. And then this is an example of further Federation mobile suit development. This is the RGM 79C, the Jim Kai, and it may or may not actually exist within the lore. It's kind of been made canon and then not canon and canon and not canon. It's confusing because when you have a series that's been going on since 1979, sometimes your extended universe stuff gets mixed up. Yes, Jason?
So how much do all these get all these guys?
Well, they cost a lot more now because of current issues with shipping between nations. But when I bought these, this one cost me roughly $23. So did this one. This one cost me about $60, and this one cost me about $50. But that's because this one was produced in like 1999, and it has never received a second run of production.
So where do they pay for how much
Yes.
I'm not gonna lie, it's a lot cheaper than
Well, and this was all before the pandemic. Now, like, the cheapest one there goes for like $60 average because of
yeah, that's
the
more
pandemic,
affordable.
and that's not including shipping. So, yes.
Would you be willing to pass around the models, or do you want to not
I will be willing to pass around all of them except this one, because this is the oldest and rarest one that I have, and it's not very sturdy, but the rest of these are pretty sturdy, so I'll be willing to pass those around to, Tiana. Sorry.
So you have to build up them, right?
Yes.
How long do they roughly take to build?
Well, it depends on how long you're building them and what sort of tools you're using. But I would say this one took me about roughly 2 hours. This one took me about roughly an hour. This one took me about roughly 4 hours. And this one, because of, I built it and then I took it apart. Well, actually, these three I all took apart. And this one I even took apart because I painted it sometimes. But it just depends on how much effort you put into it. If you just build it straight out of the box, it'll usually take, for ones about that size, about an hour to 4 hours. And then if you like paint it and stuff like that, it can take days or weeks. Okay.
How did you get into this?
That is a funny story. Basically what happened was, I believe I went to I want to say it was a Barnes & Noble's, and I saw some of them on the shelf. I'm like, that looks cool, but I didn't have any money at the time, so I couldn't buy any of them. So I went home and I started like looking it up, and then I started watching the shows and getting into it. I'm like, these are really cool, I want to get them, and now I have like a ton of them. For further exploration, everything covered in this slide takes place in the first 3 things listed here: Mobile Suit Gundam 1, Mobile Suit Gundam 2, Soldiers of Sorrow, and Mobile Suit Gundam 3, Encounters in Space. These are compilation movies that took the very first Gundam show and they cut it down, removed stuff that was weird, replaced some things. So these are the canonical events of the 1 Year War. And then you have stuff like Mobile Suit Gundam, the 08th MS Team, which is about I want to say it's like a 7 or 8 episode series that talks about ground conflict during the 1 Year War. And then you have Mobile Suit Gundam 0080, which takes place near the end of the 1 Year War, and it's about like a development team and a special operations team that's trying to stop the development team, and it's really sad because 2 of the main characters end up like kind of flirting or in love with each other, and then they never find out that they're actually pilots for opposing sides. And in the final scene of this show, they are forced to fight and kill each other. And then you have Mobile Suit Gundam 0083 Stardust Mummery, which takes place 3 years after the 1 Year War and talks about some of the remnants of Zion's military and how a organization known as the Titans was formed. So it's a skippable series, but it's kind of important if you want to understand Mobile Suit Gundam Zeta, which takes place after the first Mobile Suit Gundam. And there's a ton of other shows in the Universal timeline. There's movies in the UC timeline. There's alternate versions of the UC timeline. There's entire alternate series that don't take place in UC at all. There's series that take place like hundreds of years after UC and all this crazy stuff. So there's a ton of content. And
Who writes this?
the original series were written by a man known as Yoshiku Tomonino. But he does not have as much creative control as he used to because he made some series that the network didn't like and didn't do well with fans, so now he has less control than some other people, and it's written by a bunch of different writers now.
Yeah, that's what Emily kind of said. I was just like, but this would be a lot of things to keep track of to have multiple people writing.
Yeah, there's whole teams and stuff, and because there's some inconsistencies with some stories, that's how you end up with alternate versions of the UC timeline. It's stuff that people wrote, but it doesn't fit, so now it's its own separate thing.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. I'm like, I don't know how you have like all these people writing these stories because otherwise it would be all over the place. Okay, that makes sense.
And then these are the web sources I used. Obviously, also some of my sources were the shows because I watched the shows and that's how I got stuff about it.
How long have you been learning about this?
I believe I got my first